I'm Mrs. Princey, Associate Professor in Mental Health Nursing. Right. So the human behavior can be adapted and maladapted in various situations. So if you take the various stages of development, or whenever there is a transition or a slight change in the routine, there is an adaptation that we have to make. Some of the people can adapt to the change very easily. Some may take a very long time to adapt. Some may not adapt, only leading to the mental disorders, right? So today I'm going to talk about the maladaptive behavior which happens during the time of the disaster or stress or during any kind of the crisis. So let me talk about the disaster which is going to cause a maladaptive behavior. So let us see the definition of disaster. The disaster can be defined as the occurrence, either the natural or man-made, which is going to cause the human suffering and which will create the human needs which cannot be elevated without the proper assistance. So this is the definition which is given by the American Psychiatric Association about the disaster. You understand, when I say a disaster, it can be either a man-made disaster or a natural disaster which is going to cause a suffering in the individual or the human being, and this suffering which cannot be going to end, it will create certain human needs which cannot be alleviated without the proper assistance. So that is the meaning of the disaster. Moving on to the types of the disaster, we have got two basic types. One is the man-made disaster, the second one is the natural disaster. So when I say the natural disaster, we have got the classification like meteorological disasters. The second thing is the tropical disasters and the environmental disaster. That is all about the natural disasters. Coming to the man-made disasters, we have the disaster which happens because of the technology, industrial accidents, or it can be because of the security, right? So this is related to the man-made disaster. So you will be learning about the factors which are related to the disaster, factors affecting the disaster. Mainly we have got the host factor and the environmental factor. So if you take the host factor, which is the factor which is present in an individual, it is related to the state is age. Okay, how a particular age is how he is going to respond to a disaster. Second one is a state of immunization, whether he is vaccinated or not vaccinated. The third one is the degree of the mobility. So whether he is able to move, okay, based on the age of a person, if it is an infant or an old age. So what is the degree of mobility? How well he is able to move or shift from that area of disaster. And also the emotional stability of a person, how well he is, able to manage his emotions, to control and manage his emotions during the time of the disaster. Based on these factors, the disaster is going to affect the individuals, right? The second factor which is going to affect the disaster is the environmental factor. So in the environmental factors, so we have got the various factors like physical factors, chemical factors, biological factors, psychological factors, and the social factors. So these are the factors which are going to affect the disaster. Moving on to the characteristics of disaster. So we have got so many characteristics. I'm going to explain one by one in detail. The first one is the predictability. So you can imagine any disaster which happens, it is a man-made disaster or a natural disaster, we cannot predict it. Okay, it can happen suddenly, okay, very within short period of time, which happens suddenly without even expectation. That is, we cannot predict what will happen when. Okay, say for example, it is a natural disaster. Say therefore there is a flood which is going to happen. Maybe it is because of melting of glaciers, or it is because of heavy rain. So yes, those things that we can predict, and the meteorological department, they're going to tell us that this is what is going to happen, you have to prepare the disaster prone areas, right? So those things which can be predicted, but there are some man-made disasters. It can be the bomb or wars. All these we cannot predict. So based upon some of the disasters which can predict and some which cannot be predicted. So that is the first characteristic of a disaster. Many of the disasters which cannot be predicted. The second one is the controllability. What is this controllability? So some of the disaster is happening, right? So it can be controlled to some extent, right? But there are disasters or crises which happens which cannot be controlled at all. So we can say that the disasters can be controlled, or those disasters, especially the man-made disasters which cannot be controlled, which will already would have happened. Okay, so that is the second characteristics of the disaster. The third characteristic is the speed of onset. How fast a disaster is going to have an impact, right? Some of it within a short period of time, the disaster is going to, result in the impact. The speed of onset of the disaster is another important characteristic of the disaster. So the fourth one is the length of forewarning. Length of forewarning is before the disaster happens, what was the duration of or the length of the warning which is given. That is also is going to have an impact on the people. So if the warning was given, few hours or few days back, then the people would have been aware about it. They would do the preparation well. But if the length of the warning was very short, okay, then people won't have got enough time to get prepared for the disaster, which is going to have a major impact on the people. So that is the fourth characteristic, which is the length of the forewarning. The fifth characteristic is the duration of impact. So the duration of impact is the actual total duration for how long the disaster would have caused the impact. Okay, the impact may be, some of the disasters may have a major impact, some may cause a minor impact, right? So we can say what is the duration of the impact which happens to the people. Okay, that is another characteristics. The last one is the scope and intensity of the impact. To what intense the impact has happened. So that is another characteristic of the disaster. So these are the characteristics. We can say predictability, the controllability, the length of the forewarning, or the duration of the impact, and the intents of the impact. So based on this, the coping of an individual during the time of the disaster will happen, which is going to contribute to the adaptive behavior or the maladaptive behavior of a person. Next, we'll move on to the principles of disaster management, right? So the first principle is disaster preparedness or disaster management is the responsibility of all the spheres of the government, right? So it is not the responsibility of only one particular government, or we can say it is the responsibility of only a particular state. So whenever there is a disaster, the whole country is going to contribute to it, is going to support the people, it's going to help out or reach out to them. And it can be related to the agencies, can be governmental agencies or non-governmental agencies, which is going to support them socially during the time of the disaster. So we can say that during the time of the disaster, the management of disaster is not only related to one specified government, but all the spheres of the government, all the areas or all the committees will contribute to the disaster. The second principle is disaster management should use the resources which can be used on every day-to-day basis. Okay, they cannot give the supplies only at a particular time. One point of time there is a disaster, yes, we give these supplies. No. So every day, day-to-day, on day-to-day basis, the the supplies or the resources should be supplied to the people. The next principle is individual are responsible for their own safety. Yes, of course, there is a disaster which is happening. It is not, yes, the government is supporting, the various agencies are supporting, but it becomes a very important part that each individual is responsible for their own safety in terms of the health, physical health or the mental health, right? So even individuals should understand that it is their responsibility to safeguard themselves physically, mentally, and socially. The next principle is disaster management planning should focus on the large scale. It is not only related to a particular thing or a specific thing, but on a larger scale, the management of disaster should be carried out. The next principle is the disaster management planning should recognize or should make out the differences between the incidents and the disasters. Okay, incidents are different and disasters are different. So, what is the difference between the particular thing which has happened, whether it is an incident which has happened or it is going to have a major impact, which is going to have a disaster in the life of the person? So, we have to the disaster team management team should plan the care based upon whether it is an incident or it is a disaster. Disaster management planning should take into account the physical environment as well as the population, the structure of the population. So, whenever you plan in the disaster planning or management, you have to take into account whether the physical environment is affected or not, or whether the population is affected. So, what is the population which is affected more? So, you have to concentrate on the management of the structure of the population as well as the physical environment of the people. So, these things have to be kept in mind when you plan for a disaster management. So, these are the principles of the disaster management. So next one is the phases of the disaster. So we can say that disaster can be faced into different stages. So one is the pre-impact phase, the second one is the impact phase, and the last one is the post-impact phase. So pre-impact phase is before the impact would occur. So what is the preparations that will happen? So that is called as the pre-impact phase. So impact phase is actually the disaster which would have happened. So what kind of an impact it is going to happen on the people, on the emotions or physical or the environment of a people. So this is called as the impact phase. The last phase is the post-impact phase. So after the impact or disaster has occurred. So what is we can say it has a recovery phase. So what happens during the recovery phase? So here you can see the image of pre-impact phase, the impact phase and the post-impact phase and time duration which can happen, right? So what are the responses of the people? So and what is the response of the society which is there? That is seen here in the image. So let us see about the phases of disaster management. So mainly we have got about 5 phases of disaster management. One is the disaster preparedness. Second one is the disaster impact. The third one is the disaster recovery. The fourth one is the rehabilitation. And the fifth one is the disaster mitigation. So let me tell about each of it in detail. The first one is the disaster preparedness. So before a disaster could happen, what are the preparations that has to be done? Okay, it can be related to the people or the agencies or the government. What preparation should be done to be ready whenever the disaster strikes? So first thing is the preparation of the disaster should be in the form of 3M, that is the man, money and the material. In terms of manpower, we have to be ready. In terms of the materials or supplies, we have to be ready. In terms of the money or the finances which we require during the time of the disaster. So these are the 3 important things when we talk about the disaster preparedness. So first thing that we have to keep in mind is evaluation from past experiences of the risk. Okay, previously there would have been a disaster which would have happened. So, what is the previous history or the instances which happened during the earlier time of the disaster? So, what are the risk factors which or the risk group which is going to be affected? So, that we have to do the evaluation when we plan for a disaster preparation. The second thing what we are going to see is the population who are prone for the disaster. So you know that the infants or the elderly group or the age group is the ones which are going to be affected more because of the the disaster. So you have to take into account the population who are at risk or prone to be the victims of the disaster. The third one is the location of disaster prone areas. You know, there are some areas in our country which are more prone for disasters or which are more at risk of terrorist activities. It can be or a natural disasters, right? So we have to locate those areas or find out those areas which are more prone for disaster and keep ready the things which is required in that particular location. The next one for preparation is the organization of communication information system or the warning to the particular people. If it is a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, we have to communicate to the people and warn them about the disaster which may happen. So in those cases, we have to find out the organizations which are going to communicate to the people or communicate to the public about giving the information that these are the things which may happen, that we are giving a warning to the population or to the location. So that is another important. The organization should be ready for information, education, and the communication. The next thing is we have to ensure the coordination and response mechanisms. So we have to coordinate with the various agencies or the communities or the people, and we have to make ready for the response of the disaster. The next preparation is we have to develop a public awareness program. So we have to now and then conduct the various programs in the communities and make the public aware about such disasters which may strike anytime. So the education that we have to deliver should be planned in terms of the programs. The next is the coordination with the media. So media plays a very important role in the communication, information, and the education, right? So we have to find out those media through which the education or through which the warnings can be given. So that is the coordination with the media that we have to do timely, that the people can be protected from the maladaptive behavior. The next one is the national and international relations, right? So what is this? Whenever the disasters will strike, so we have got the country or we have got the government which is going to support the particular community where the disaster would have happened, or we will get the international support. So we should always maintain the relationship with the other countries or the areas, so that at times of disaster we will get the support from the nation as well as through the international sources. The next important preparation is keeping the stock of the supplies. It can be related to the food, the drugs, or the various other supplies. So whenever there is a prone or a risk, the particular disaster can have an impact, we have to keep in stock the supplies like food or drugs or various other requirements that can be given to the community. So this is about the disaster preparedness, which is the first phase. Okay, first step. The second step is disaster impact. So the disaster impact phase, what are the things that we have to keep in mind? So during the impact phase, impact has already happened. So we have to do the search rescue process, right? So we have to search the people and we have to categorize them based on the the severity of the impact which has happened. We have to identify the people, rescue them, and give the first aid to such kind of the people. The second thing that we are going to do is the field care. So field care is in the field or in the area of disaster. As much as possible, what is the delivery of care that we may have to give? It can be for the minor accidents or the minor injuries. What is the aid or care that we can give in that particular place? So, or it is an emergency, what is the field care that we are giving there? Okay, so ambulatory services that we are giving. So that is the field care that we have to do during the time of the impact. The third one is the triage. So when I say the triage system, it is nothing but we are giving some color codes to the people who are being injured in the severe cases or moderately severe cases. So we are just classifying the injuries and giving the treatment based on the severity. So when I say the triage, we have got the different color codes based on the priority of the needs. So we have got the golden hour, or we have got the immediate priority, the moderate kind of a priority we give, or we say a minor or a minimal priority that we give for the minor accidents, or we can give the least priority. So these are based on the priority. We are going to categorize the individual needs and we are going to code them into different color codes. So we have got, like, if the disaster or an impact has caused the death of an individual or deceased, we are giving a code of black. So if it is an emergency priority that we have to give, okay, or immediate treatment that we have to give, we give the color code, or we give the tags to the client with a red one. If it is a delayed one, okay, that it can be survived for a period of time, it can be managed, and we give a yellow tag. If it is a minor, or we can say the least priority we are giving a green tag. So based on the tag, the healthcare professionals are going to meet such kind of a priority needs of the client. So that is a triage system that we use during the impact. So the next one during the impact is the tagging. So this is what I told you, even in the tagging. So based on the color codes, we are giving the tags and categorizing the individual for delivering the care. The last one during the impact that we are doing is identification of death. So we are going to identify who are the people who are dead or deceased, and we are going to classify them, or we are going to communicate to the friends or the relatives. We are going to find out the relatives who can carry out the further process. So that is identification of the death. So we can say that in the impact phase, so these are the things that we are going to do, especially about the tagging system, the triage system, and delivering the care in the field. Okay, so this is the impact phase. Moving on to the next phase, which is the disaster response. During the disaster response phase, already the disaster would have happened. We can categorize this as a post-disaster phase. So during this phase, you have to do the epidemiological surveillance and to find out the mortality or the morbidity rate of the impact which has caused. So we are going to find out how many people are dead because of the disaster, mortality rate, and also we are going to find out the disease rate, how many people have been injured or got any kind of these diseases because of the impact of the disaster. So that is the first thing that we are going to make during the disaster response phase. The second thing is about the immunization. We are going to find out whether the people are immunized or whether they require any kind of immunization to protect themselves. Third one here is the nutrition. So nutrition is another important thing. The food supplies, the adequacy of nutrition that a disaster group should get. So that is the third thing that we give. We supply all the stocks to the clients in terms of the food, the nutritional requirements, or we give the protective environment to the client, so that it is going to help out. So that it's going to help them come out of this impact of the disaster. So that is a disaster response. The next stage is the rehabilitation phase. So during the rehabilitation phase, already the disaster would have happened, yes, we as much as possible we have to support the particular group which has got the disaster in terms of the food supply, in terms of the vector control, in terms of the providing the social support to the particular group, water supply, food supply, proper sanitation facilities, as well as the vector control. So these are the services that will be given during the rehabilitation phase. The final phase of the disaster is a disaster mitigation. So here the disaster mitigation is nothing but we are trying to reduce or decrease the severity of the impact of the disaster. Disaster mitigation is one which involves reducing the effects of the emergency. So what are the effects which has happened because of which we are reducing the severity of the effect. So we are going to give them some kind of a support such as the facilities of schools, facilities of health, house facilities. Then we are going to provide the sanitation or sewage facilities to the community. So such kind of the services will be given in the last phase, which is disaster mitigation. So these are the various phases of the disaster management. So one is the disaster preparedness, second one is the disaster impact, third one is disaster response, the fourth one is the rehabilitation, and the last one is the disaster mitigation. So we'll see what are the effects of disaster. So what kind of an effect or impact the disaster can cause. So one is it can cause the death, it can cause the increase in the communicable disorders or diseases. It can have an impact on the psychological aspect of a person. It can result in the disability. Some may lose the particular part of the body, can lead to the disabilities. The functioning of a particular system is affected, so the disability can be happened because of the disaster. Food shortage, socio-economic crisis which can happen, or there may be a shortage of the food supplies and other supplies. It can be the environmental disruption. So these are the impacts or effects of a disaster that can happen. From the, it can be of death till the total disruption of the personality of a person it can be. So if a person is able to cope during the time of the disaster, he is getting a proper social support, he is getting all the supplies, he is getting all the support from the government, then he will be able to adapt quickly and he will be able to move on from that area of psychological impact. But if the person is not getting all these facilities or the support, social support, then he may end up with the maladaptive behavior, can lead to the mental disorders. Okay, so this is about the disaster. Hope you all have understood the topic.